This time, on our Parts of New Mexico Rio Grande Rift road trip, we're going to Guadalupe Mountains National Park, on the eastern edge of the rift. I only went to it because, well, I was close to it. I had no idea it's a spectacular hiking spot. Its many summit trails have spectacular views from 3,000 feet above two basins. It's 30 minutes down the road from Carlsbad Caverns, on the Texas border, about 50 miles from the town of Carlsbad, New Mexico. It's one of the least visited national parks, apparently because hikers don't know about it. Until now. It has rugged trails to 4 of the highest peaks in Texas. But it's a national park because of its unique geology. Students and researchers from around the world come here to study Permian sea creatures and energy-bearing geology. It's one of the best places in the world to do both. It's part of the same 400-mile-long reef that makes up Carlsbad Caverns. The reef formed in an inland sea during the time of the supercontinent Pangaea. Much more recently, 3,000 feet of it was exposed due to uplift during the rifting process, which exposed fossils and gave us amazing trails that can be hiked year-round. It's a large park, and you'll need a vehicle to get around it. Its main visitor center, campground, and, well, several trailheads are at Pine Springs. Up the road a bit, there's Frejole Ranch, which has a small museum and short trails with lots of spring water. McKittrick Canyon's a little farther away, and it has day-use trails, and it's very popular in the fall. Dog Canyon is 2 hours away. It's really remote, with just 9 camping spots, and a few day hikes. And if you're a photographer not into hiking, well, you're really going to like Salt Basin Dunes. It's a mini White Sands, and hopefully you've seen my segment on that incredible place. But this place has something extra, seasonal flooding, which makes for great photo ops. Like other parks on the tour, there isn't a lodge or even a restaurant here, though there are 2 visitor centers. Again, Pine Springs is the main one. There are just 40 campsites, plus the backcountry permit-required sites. We're going to start our tour at Pine Springs, and it's where the rangers collect the fee, issue backcountry permits, and answer questions, though they didn't want to be on camera. It's a great place to learn about the park. There are a couple of geology walls, and a wildlife display featuring the park's 3 climate zones: desert, mountain, and riparian, which I had to look up, and it means places with water, meaning the springs. And I didn't see any wildlife at all on either of my trips in May or December. The geology exhibits feature rocks of the Permian Basin. This is a sample of the limestone that often acts as an impermeable cap rock. This rock is where oil comes from. It's a dolomite of tightly packed sand grains, but there's space between each grain, and in the Permian, that space is full of oil or gas. It looks and feels solid, and incredible pressures are required to get the oil out. Another wall has samples of rocks from the time of Pangaea, when this area was under the center lobe of an inland sea called the Delaware Basin. It's a reminder that the Earth is constantly changing. And of course, they have things to buy, souvenirs, and very little food, though. But they do have the hiker's favorite, moleskin, to prevent blisters. Outside, there's a place to sit, and info signs that explain why these ordinary-looking rocks are anything but. It has a view of one of the highest peaks, El Capitan. It's been a landmark for travelers for hundreds of years. A nearby trail will take you there. Throughout our Rio Grande Rift tour, we've seen how crustal expansion creates basins and ranges. This park has both. The trails to the 4 peaks are obviously in the range. But less than an hour away, on a road that's an adventure in itself, there's a basin that's about 2,000 feet lower than the Pine Springs Visitor Center. At just 3,600 feet, mineral-rich runoff from the mountains has collected for millions of years. Hopefully you'll remember from the White Sand segment that there's salt and gypsum layers in those mountains, thanks to the old Permian Sea. There's no drainage out of the basin, so summer heat evaporates the water, leaving only a salt flat and gypsum dunes. I've seen some amazing photos of it during the seasonal floods, and that's the main reason I wanted to come to the park. Unfortunately, it's been closed. and I couldn't get a good answer as to why or when it will reopen. I've hiked hundreds of miles in the mountains, and I've never heard of a trail being closed because of high winds. Until now. The west wind from the mountains often rushes down the ridge at 30 or more miles an hour. On this May Day, high winds?
70 mile an hour gust down here, 80 up in the high country.
The rangers were concerned about backcountry campers and closed the trails to the highest peaks. There's limited cell coverage, which makes it hard to distribute a warning. So anyway, I couldn't go on a big hike this trip. Being remote and with a base elevation over 5,700 feet, you would think this would be a great spot to shoot the stars. Well, at times it is. But the wind filled the sky with dust. Even on a moonless night, yes, I timed the trip that way, there were few stars for good astrophotography. There was just too much dust obscuring the stars. I've hiked all over the West, but never considered hiking here. And that was a mistake. There's lots of good trails that are easy, and there's several rather difficult summit trails. Like the 8.4-mile Guadalupe Peak Trail that rises about 3,000 feet to 8,751 feet above sea level, the highest point in Texas. It's rugged with no water, and the rangers recommend that you carry at least a gallon in the summer. And in the winter, it can get a little hairy. But this park is a great place to get into summiting, because the summits aren't all that high, compared to, say, a 14er in Colorado. The park's website has lots of info on its trails, and not just the 4 strenuous peak trails. There are several hiking hubs, including the Pine Springs area, Frijole Ranch, McKidrick Canyon, and Dog Canyon. The park's website is a great resource. At first glance, the relatively short Devil's Hall looks easy-ish, with just over 500 feet of up. It turns out it's tricky, requiring good scrambling skills, especially after a rain. The website even mentions search and rescue procedures, so it's not as easy as it looks on paper. Frijole Ranch has a couple of easier trails, and some trails for horses. There are a couple of springs around here which brings in various types of wildlife. The Manzanita Spring Trail is the only wheelchair-accessible trail in the park. It's only a half a mile out and back, and it leads to a pretty pond. If you're looking for a little longer trail, the Smith Spring Loop Trail is a 2.3-mile loop with maples, oaks, and maybe even a deer or two. The McKidrick Canyon area is a little farther away. It has its own unstaffed visitor center. This canyon is very well known for its fall color. Its 0.9-mile nature loop is a great way to explore the Chihuahuan Desert climate zone. Then there's the Permian Reef Trail. It's an 8.4-mile round trip with over 2,000 feet of elevation gain. This is a great place for budding geologists, as it has markers that are described in a geology guidebook that's available in the Pine Spring Visitor Center. And if you're a photographer, the ridgetop has great views of the canyon. Another advantage to this park is the uncrowded trails can be hiked year-round. When I was here in December, the weather, apart from the wind, was great. A few weeks later, a Facebook post showed that the Guadalupe Peak Trail was covered in snow. But there's little of that in the spring and fall, and that's when the park is busiest. So again, this is a great place to go hiking, especially if you're in great shape, and the website will help you explore it. Since the Salt Basin Dune area was closed, I decided to drive to a spot where the El Paso Highway crosses a small piece of it. When I saw that dust devil off to the right, I knew I was getting close. I braved the winds just long enough to get a few shots. Humans have come here for generations, and a local historical marker says Native Americans and local Hispanics came here for the salt, and everything was okay until the 1870s, when El Paso businessmen fought them for the right to mine the salt. In the end, the salt was no longer free. They had to pay the businessmen. Well, that's my take on this rarely visited national park. I've learned it's a fantastic hiking spot for those fit enough to take it on. It's also a great place to learn about Earth history. And if you're a photographer, it's a great place to capture landscapes that few others have seen. I came here because it's close to Carlsbad Caverns and the parks of southern New Mexico. But now I know it's a great year-round destination. and we don't have to wait till summer to climb a mountain. There are 3-hour or so drives back to the Rio Grande. You can go through El Paso, or you can climb to over 9,000 feet and stop at the quaint tourist town of Cloudcroft. Or you can take the long way, through Roswell. I had done the first two, so on my last visit, it was time to go through Roswell and tour its UFO museum. Aliens apparently are very good for business. This Dunkin' Donuts went all in. The local McDonald's is in the shape of a spaceship, and there's aliens milling about. Of course, there's souvenir shops, but the UFO museum is the big draw. Because they were working on the floors, I got in for just $3. And weirdly, they let me film. I even live streamed a 15-minute visit. It's still available on my channel. There's lots of framed articles on the walls about the famous 1947 event when an alien spacecraft allegedly crashed nearby. The Air Force, of course, had a different explanation. One wall is dedicated to stories about people who claim to have been abducted. There's some pretty cool models of some alien spacecraft, too. There's also a reading room full of books on the 1947 event, as well as many other alien encounters. And yes, I did go to the gift shop to get another magnet. I didn't stay long, but it was certainly worth $3. I can finally say that I've been there, and yes, it's a little kitschy, but these people really believe. Just seeing how decked out the whole town was, and the alien theme, was also kind of fun and made the trip worthwhile. Now that we visited all the southern parts on the trip, next time we're going north, to the Rio Grande itself, near Albuquerque, where we'll tour a Native American village taken over by the Spanish. Then we'll go to Petroglyphs National Monument before visiting volcanoes and a Native American settlement carved out of volcanic material. And then to wrap up the entire trip, we're going to fly over a beautiful gorge at the center of the Rio Grande Rift.